This is TWiT.
So the colors are out. Jason Snell, he says it's just a script. He just runs a script, and all the graphs are generated. So let's go through it. You, Renee, and Lori were on the phone call listening last week. What's the top line? Renee, what is the number that we should be paying attention to?
Typically it's forecast for next quarter. They beat the estimates, which is always important because you always want to do less badly than Wall Street thinks you might.
That helps the stock price.
Yeah, and they did. Well, I mean, that's the weird thing. If we dig down deep into this, Apple for many, many years, for almost a decade, made more money than companies that had oligopoly control over fossil fuel resources, and Wall Street punished them for it because they thought each time they will never be able to repeat it. And quarter after quarter. Yeah, they did it. And now the iPhone business is going down. It went really far down. Now maybe it's leveling off. But the services story is going up, and Wall Street was like, yay! They rewarded the stock.
Company posted revenue of $58 billion. That's down year over year about 5%. But there are some bright lights. iPad revenue up 22%. Of course, they had new iPads. Services.
Although it was the Pro, they said, that drove that. The new iPads were like frosting on the Pro cake.
Interesting. Well, I love that Pro. Yeah. And with the prospects of iOS 13 making it really a Pro device, I can see why people might be interested. Services revenue, we knew that would go up 16%. Mac revenue, sad to say, down 5%. I'm not surprised.
Well, the most interesting thing about that, though, is that Apple is typically really classy about Intel. And they didn't mention Intel's name, but they said that Mac revenue was down because they could not get the chips from a supplier. Yeah. And that had they been able to get the chips they needed, Mac revenue would have been up.
Not everybody is as classy as Apple. Intel's name has been... People are shaking their fists at Intel.
But not only can they not do 10 nanometer, they can't supply the 14 nanometer chips that they're supposed to supply in a timely fashion. And on top of that, they still haven't built in basic things like support for larger amounts of the faster, lower power memory, or things like better DisplayPort standards. So you have to still work around the chips even when you get them.
Apple said if we'd had the chips, we could have sold many more MacBook Airs, right? The demand was high, but they just couldn't fulfill it.
Yeah.
Looking at the revenue on the pie chart, iPhone is a little more than half, 54% of total revenue. And then I think it's actually fairly well divided up. Services is growing and growing, now 1/5 of all Apple revenue. But I think that's a fairly good distribution. You'd like to see, iPhone continues strong, but you'd like to see services make up some of the difference. The revenue is pretty much what you'd expect for a fourth quarter. You could see those dips second quarter, every Q2, you can see those dips.
And wearables did great again, too. Both Watch and AirPods performed really well for them.
That's good. Revenue down a little bit. But again, this is a very cyclic business. When you look at charts like that, you can really see the cycles. It's just, exactly what you'd expect. iPad revenue changed the best ever, 22% year over year.
Yeah. I wonder what that says about the iPad market these days, where people, the big tentpole release last year was the iPad Pro, whereas the tentpole release the year before that was the $329 education-oriented iPad. So I wonder what that says about what the overall market for iPad is. Is it people that really do want to spend $1,000 for something that will allow them to keep their laptops at home, or home users who want something that throws away everything that's cumbersome about a desktop operating system? Or is it really people who want to get the lower price points, who really just want an ancillary product for their computing world?
Is the Mini or the new Air, are they in this or no? They came out after.
They're at the very end of the quarter, so they had, I forget how many weeks. It was only a couple weeks into the quarter.
So you won't. So as you said, it's the iPad Pros that are driving this.
Well, that was a big update trigger for a lot of people. When the new design comes out, a lot of people make that. It helps them. It encourages that decision.
Yeah,
and it was a substantive update. It feels different. It moves differently. So that's, if you were waiting for a new iPad Pro, this is what got you to go.
Yeah. I'm glad, because the iPad had been kind of moribund for the last few years. So I'm glad to see that. Services is exactly as I think on target as Tim Cook probably wanted. I mean, that is a very steady growth. What more can you say? This is going to be a revenue driver going forward more and more. Revenue up 16%. It's been up more in other quarters, but as you can see, when you look at the graph of revenue, quarter by quarter.
And this is still pre TV Plus, pre Apple Card, pre Apple Arcade.
Absolutely.
So.
That's right. Wearables, home accessories, increase of 5.1%. I'm sorry, no, 5.1 billion. My apologies. In revenue, that's down from last quarter, but highest for Q2 in some time. In fact, ever, it looks like. Total Apple revenue also down a little bit, but as you said, they beat the street. Profit $11.6 billion. A tidy sum, but still.
And we have that in 20s and singles.
Yeah. So I don't know. Is there anything else to say about this?
And Tim Cook said they buy a new company like once every 2 weeks, once a week or every 2 weeks or something. No big deal.
Wow. China, he said, is starting to come back. That's going to be very important. Lori, you were listening. Anything you heard you thought was important on this call?
I mean, the numbers that you're talking about are basically the same. I think for me, like the one thing that stood out the most was one of the last things that was mentioned was whether or not the market in India was going to be difficult for Apple to break into because there's so many Android users there. And the response was, well, it's actually good that there's so many people using Android because that just means there's more people for us to get to turn into iPhone users,
Wow.
So
that's the silver lining. Okay.
Yeah.
But not just that, unstated is that if Apple has yet to indicate that they can really compete on anything that's mid-range price or lower. But if the entire world is buying phones that are capable of running Apple Music, that are capable of running Apple TV, that are capable of subscribing to Apple News, that can also be a big win for Apple. So they'll take money from anybody. They don't care to see if their blood runs in the Apple original logo colors.
And the China stuff was good, but then we had
we have tariffs.
Yeah, we had the tariff news come out right afterwards, and all those gains just started being clawed right back.
Yeah. Is Apple, so in the past, the iPhone has not been subject to those tariffs. Is this new plan, which is not yet in effect, but would it affect iPhones?
It's so ambiguous because and everything is classified differently. Like in some countries, if it looks like a watch, it's a watch, but otherwise it's a computer, and it's hard to tell country by country. But if you apply let's just say you apply a steady 25 to everything, then that changes a lot of stuff.
It really did surprise me that Apple's bought 24 companies because you don't really hear. That's in the last 6 months. You don't really hear about these. They're not big news. Are they smaller companies? Is that why? Or
specific talent and technology acquisitions? And Apple, if you find out about it and ask them, they will say Apple from time to time acquires a company, and we don't generally discuss our future plan.
Right.
Typically, they're like $8 million to $20 million acquisitions, so they're not.
Yeah. Still stunning because
they're not that big. I would like Apple to buy my company for $8 million. Thank you very much.
There you go.
You get Lori too. Wait a minute, don't do that.
Apple, if you're listening, I'll underbid her by $80. No matter what she bids.
Oh, let's get a bidding war going.
$1. Oh no, wait. Oh.
I'm a freelance journalist. I will take canned and dented food that is within its non-perishable date.
So Tim was at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting when he gave this interview to CNBC. I'm not sure.
He did a lot of interviews over the last week or so.
But still, that's kind of an amazing statistic. If we have money left over, says Cook, we look to see what else we can do. We acquire everything we need that can fit and has a strategic purpose to it.
Well, I mean, M&A moved under Tim Cook out from Luca Maestri, and people were assuming that meant that Apple was going to finally target Tesla and Netflix and Disney and all the giant purchases of their pundit dreams. And I think this was Cook just saying, no, we do this all the time. This is a change in reporting structure because we want to stay dynamic. Please don't read too much into it.
Yeah, I got schooled. I can't remember who schooled me, if it was Horace Dediu or maybe Jean-Louis Gasset, or perhaps it was from Neil Seibart. But I think it was Neil Seibart who explained acquisitions. Big acquisitions are tough. You have the culture clash. You have to merge these two big behemoths together. Little acquisitions make a lot of sense for intellectual property, for engineers. They're useful strategically, a lot easier to assimilate into the company. And
they're still integrating Beats. Like Beats, that was a big years. That was like 2014.
Yeah. And
I think Beats, they still have a lot of Beats people in Los Angeles, and they still have other offices.
Yeah. Well, they have the Power Beats. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Lori.
When these large companies are just buying up a bunch of small companies. Is this beneficial to creative development, or does it stifle it? Because on the one hand, I see it as being good for creative development because the end goal would be that somebody like Apple or Google or Amazon or somebody like that would buy you out. So that means you did a great job of creating and innovating. But on the other hand, if the end result is that somebody's just going to buy you out anyway, how far are you going to grow creatively?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I really do think that there's a brain drain that happens as these small companies get bought and sublimed into Google and Facebook and Apple and all these other companies before they can become the next Apple, before they can become the next Instagram or Facebook. It's going to be difficult to see if that's good for the industry or bad, because we need pirates, we need mutants, we need people who are like, So, is anybody ever going to be the next Apple, or is Apple just going to buy them up before they get the opportunity to do that? And if that's the case, are they?
Like Google never sold to Facebook, never sold to Google. Google never sold to Yahoo. And Snap refused to sell to Facebook or Google. So some of them keep going. Yeah, but that was eons ago. That was like the early 2000s. Could be like 100 years ago. It's like a Steam-based economy back then.
Really? It was the Gilded Age.